Well, that happened.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater came step by, and I think there's probably a few of those today, make sure you hit subscribe down below with the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again. Remember, we get to 1,000 subscribers. We're giving something away. The faster we get there, the bigger the thing is. We're kind of approaching 900 pretty quickly. We did something at 250, 500, 750, and so on. If after listening or talking with me about the Houston and Miami basketball game, you don't want to talk about that anymore, that is totally fine. Tell me if you put sliced cheese on your bagel. Now, I guess that's two bagel questions in a row this week. I'm thrown off. That's what we're doing. All right. So in this episode, we're going to talk some about Miami and Houston in the Sweet 16. If you have not heard at this point, you're living in the rock or something. Houston does fall in the Sweet 16 to Miami, 89-75. 14-point loss. We'll get into all kinds of stuff about that game in a moment. I want to talk like big picture things in this game, statistical anomalies, and so on, more nitty-gritty kind of stuff in this game in the second segment. And then in the third segment, we'll talk some about Jarace Walker, who announced after the game that he is heading to the NBA draft. I'll talk about that decision he made and stuff like that in the third segment. So let's talk some about this game. Obviously, Houston does fall, like I mentioned, 89-75, 14-point loss. It is the only time this season Houston has given up over 80 points. It's worth pointing out that is a statistical anomaly for the Cougs. There were moments where Houston led early in this half, around that first. They don't play quarters, but around that first quarter mark, Houston was kind of neck and neck. We'll go up one, down one, that kind of stuff. And there's a moment in the second half where Houston cut it to 51-49. I want to point out that was with 14 minutes left in the half, so plenty of time for Houston to make the same kind of run, and for the game to feel a lot like the round of 32 game did when Houston played Auburn. Jim Larranaga called a timeout, a veteran coach at Miami with veteran players. Again, they don't play any freshmen. And then after that, they came out and hit a couple different threes. And by just 4 minutes of game later, it was a 17-point lead. It went from 51-49 to 70-53. Houston chipped away some, and there were moments still in that last 10 minutes where there's a shot here, but that was really it. The run they made after that timeout was the game. MVP of the game for Miami is going to have to be the Nijel kid. I don't have all the stack of caps to toss off at this point, but he's a caps off kind of performance from him. Shooting numbers I thought were interesting in the game. Miami continued their strong shooting throughout the game, and Houston did not. So in the first half, from behind the three-point line, Houston was 7 of 17, and Miami was 6 of 14. It's surprising to me that Houston was 7 of 17 because they also had 2 foot on the line long twos, and I did not feel like Houston shot and made more of those shots than Miami did, but they did. They also missed more, right, because 7 of 17. And then by the end of the game, I should say, Houston was 9 of 31, and Miami was 11 of 25. That is the 5th most makes from behind the arc that Miami's had this season. It was an exceptional shooting performance for them, even. And that is the 4th most three-pointers Houston has shot in a game all season, and the most they've shot in a close game. I guess Houston ended up losing after the foul game at the end by 14, but the most they've lost in a close game or loss this season. Just uncharacteristic in that aspect. Also, it was not just the first team to break 80 points on Houston, but it was just the second team to shoot over 50% on Houston. And the other team was a team that committed 22 turnovers. So they had their own faults. And so on the whole, I think it's part of me wants to say it's fair to blame this on the defense, right? Houston's been statistical, incredibly historic level defense throughout stretches of the season, consistently at the top of all of college basketball and various defensive analytics that account for strength of schedule and things like that too. I know people are like, oh, it's America, but like they account for that as well. Frankly, even if you just look at like Miami's guard play in this game, they're one of just 8 different teams to have less than 10 turnovers against Houston, right? They were just a mature veteran guard-led bunch that didn't make mistakes and had one guy get hot. I say that because during the game, it felt like all of Miami was just not going to miss from 3. But truthfully, the team went 11 of 25, and Nijel Pack went 7 of 10. Now, he is a sophomore, I believe, if I'm reading things right, he's a third-year sophomore with the COVID year and things like that, right? How about 7 of 10 from 3? If you take away Nijel Pack and just like let the percentages lie after that, the rest of the team was 4 of 15, right? Like nothing crazy, nothing outlandish, a fairly, frankly, average game for Miami. 4 of 15 would be actually a little bit below their averages. So it's almost worth saying that like with Poplar shooting so poorly for them and like everyone else being kind of held in check, it was just the Nijel Pack game. And those things happen in March. March Madness is a series of 1 game sample size and even a best 2 out of 3 kind of thing. There's no reason to think that this series couldn't have gone Houston's way because of the way stretches of this game went. Nijel Pack just had that kind of a shooting night. And there were moments in this game where it was very, very obvious that it was going to be that kind of a night. Like there was the one play where on a late shot clock possession, the ball falls in Norshad Omier, who's not like a jump shooter, but it gets in his hands at the top of the key, and he's fumbling around with it and just like kind of gets that nail area and pops up and just chucks at the basket, does not have a shot clock violation. It bounces the backboard and rattles them around. It has like 6 bounces before going in. It was just that kind of night for Miami shooting the basketball, and Houston had trouble responding. I do think, and I said this throughout the week leading up to this, that the pace was dictated by Miami. You don't get to 89 without a lot of possessions. And while they shot well, 51.7% from the field, Miami did, that's not a high enough percentage where you can get anywhere over 70 without having a bunch of possessions in the basketball game, right? For what it's worth, the field goals across the board, not just from the three-point line, also kind of sunk for Houston as far as they kind of kept up in the first half and trailed off from keeping up with Miami in the second half. That's why the lead obviously expands. That's how math works, Ainsworth. I know I teach history, but that was just, it was painful to watch in that aspect. I want to talk some about the statistics. I'm sorry. We did a little bit of statistics there. I want to talk some about the X's and O's in the second segment and kind of what I noticed that Miami was able to do to take advantage of Houston. And frankly, to their credit, what they did very well and what the holes in the Houston defense allowed. If I know anything about Sampson, I don't imagine they'll be back the holes will be there next season because he's the kind of guy that makes sure of those things. But first, let's talk a little bit about how to make some money back on FanDuel. Now, if you're like me and you really, really like your Houston Cougars, you're looking for some way to get back in the game a little bit right now, right? The tournament is heating up. We're heading to the Final Four next weekend in Houston, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. They can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the net, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more FanDuel. I went to their site and I looked at the Elite Eight matchups. They've got Kansas State favored by 1.5 points over Florida Atlantic. They've got Gonzaga as an underdog by 2.5 points to UConn. They've got Creighton as a 1.5 point favorite over San Diego State. And they've got Texas Austin as a 3.5 point favorite over those Miami Hurricanes. Now, I have a couple thoughts here. One is that if we watched UT Austin play last weekend in the 64-32 round, right, we'll remember that they played dramatically worse on 48 hours rest in the 32 game. I think it's easy to forget that Xavier did come back and almost win that game. And so in this instance, I'm actually saying, it might be worth it to take Miami as the underdog there, right? Can they keep it closer than 3.5 points? We just saw what their force of the pace is. Further, they feel like it feels good to bet on, like, if you're going to lose like the team that wins the whole thing. Anyway, I feel like that might be a little wide. Being the biggest spread of the four, having just seen Miami play, that seems a little silly to me. The other one I want to say here, too, is I can't believe Gonzaga is an underdog. Gonzaga has been to lots of Final Fours, been to the championship game. Coach is still there. Timmy's still there. I know, like, guards have come and gone, but Julian Strawther's the real deal. Connecticut's been wildly up and down and erratic this season. I know they played well in the tournament thus far, but like they've had highs and lows. I feel like Gonzaga as an underdog is another one I would pick in this bunch. If you've got to pick in Creighton San Diego State, again, that's a 1.5 point Creighton lean on the line there. Or in Kansas State, Florida Atlantic, that's 1.5 points Kansas State's way. I know Florida Atlantic, and frankly, there's something poetic about having Florida Atlantic and Miami both make the Final Four potentially. They're not that far apart or whatever. It would be anyway. Tell me in the comments if you got something to think on those, because I don't know if I could do that, especially if you're trying to make up some cash after what just happened to Houston. But I'm telling you, whatever you want to do, however you want to do those things, or however you want to get back in the game, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, so this is going to sound like I'm coach bashing here, and I actually think Kelvin Sampson is a genius. So much so that, like, I admired him at Oklahoma and Indiana, and I was frankly ecstatic when our Rockets got him on the sidelines as well, right? Like, I really, really admire Sampson as a coach. That he is Houston Cougar basketball coach is really just this fortuitous thing, at least in my life as a fan, right? And so I don't mean this to come off as something that he does wrong. I think Miami took advantage of things that he preaches as must-dos in the culture, right? Houston pressures the ball very, very hard as the clock winds down. So as the shot clock goes from 30 to 20, they're playing different kinds of defense than they are from 20 to 10. And they're playing different kinds of defense than they are from 10 to 0, right? That is a hallmark of a Sampson defense. And they are, like, they will tell you if you ask them in situations after, like during practice situational things, what portion or what third of the shot clock things happen in, right? Like, they break things down that far and that like minutely. And that's why Sampson's so good at what he does. But in the latter 2/3 of the shot clock, so after that 20-second mark, you latch and pressure the ball when it's beyond a certain, like, outside far away. And what Miami is able to do, I don't know if they know the nuances of what Houston's doing when necessarily, but when they felt pressure on the ball, whether it be a monster double team off a screen or just tight ball pressure, they're backing the ball up and pulling the defense out with them. And if it's two, then they're hitting for a 4-on-3 really quickly by hitting a slip screen. Or if it's 1-on-1, they're getting it, swinging it, and then they're trying to penetrate while the defense is sucked out, right? Because the guys are so tight in the pressure versus what's going on. The same intense pressure that Houston has lived with all season ultimately led to them kind of giving up a lot of points in this, because they'd pull it out and poof, right? Pulling out with them and going back. Really, really was interesting to see how Miami pulled those guys away, kicks the ball to the side, and then drives and kicks against a punctured defense. It worked a lot for them. The way it worked in double teams was actually not quite as efficient, even though on paper and X's and O's, hitting the open guy that's a slipping screen kind of guy, you would think would be a little bit easier. The other thing that was interesting from a X's and O's perspective is Houston went young for a stretch where they had Javier Francis, Emmanuel Sharp. I don't think Arsenault was in the game. Definitely had Jairus. Younger guys on the floor. Shed was out. He had back problems, it looked like, in the first half. He had a heating pad on it, right? And that was when Miami kind of pounced. For all the things Javier does well, the moment might have been a little big, right? It's a younger guy. Whatever the case may be, North Shadowmere kind of was eating his lunch on the boards, right? And that was when they said, hey, we don't have to send all our guys to the defensive glass on rebounds, right? They trusted North Shadowmere to get rebounds, and he did. And then they were having leak outs and kick aheads, and got, like, when Houston had, I think, taken a 2-point lead at that, like, 8-9 minute mark in the first half, or 8 or 9 minutes left in the first half, I should say. Once they stopped sending all 5 guys to the defensive glass, O'Meara would kick it, he'd hit Wong or Poplar, and that guy would kick it ahead to the guy for I think Miller had one dunk to it, like boom, 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 a couple fast break passes really, really fast. And Sampson had to call a timeout, and he didn't typically call a whole lot of first half timeouts, if you haven't noticed on the season. Sampson had to call a timeout because at that moment, suddenly Houston was looking around like, who's supposed to be back? And the answer is, as a coach, the most common answer, I should say. I don't know what Sampson would do if he had weeks to prepare for it, but the most common answer would be, if my guy does not box me out, I'm not actually supposed to go get the offensive rebound. I'm supposed to go chase him to make sure I don't give up a dunk the other way, right? Counterintuitive, I know, but the deal is that higher percentage if you're a guard in a traditionally built program with like bigs down low being bigs and whatever, is you're not going to get that board. But Houston is trained so often to send at least one of, if not two of, their guards to the glass. And that's that tenacity, that aggression that Houston plays with. It just kind of bit them here because those are the guys getting back beat over the top for that like short stretch. And that matters because Houston goes from like 23-23 to down 29-23, 31-33, boom, 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 right? It also would be remiss to not point out that Houston had a few turnovers in the first half. I believe it was 6 turnovers in the first half. And Miami pulled off 15 points off of those 6 turnovers. That is as efficient a transition offense off a turnover like as you can statistically have, right? That's hitting threes in transition. That's getting and one baskets in transition. That is as efficient a transition offense as you can have. And listen, I understand Miami is fast. I understand Miami had stretches of the season looked like the best team in the ACC. I understand they had Player of the Year in the ACC conference and the American and the Atlantic Coast Conference. I understand all of those things. That's abnormal. That's not just Group 5, Power 5. That's no slight even necessarily to Houston. That is just a crazy good day in transition offense. That means things, because transition offense takes some chaos, takes some creativity, and takes some balls bouncing the right way. And that implies that they all did in the first half. So Houston goes in the halftime with a deficit and kind of comes back out and cuts it down. And then when Larranaga calls that timeout mentioned in the first segment, and they come out and hit some threes right away, that was when the Nijel Pack can't miss thing felt really, really real. So much so that in the second half in a transition, kid's feeling himself a little bit and takes a heat check transition 3 from the 3/4 mark. So if you're looking at, there's like a little tick mark over by where the coaches stand. It's the 3/4. So if they advance the ball and this, then the other thing, he's hitting transition 3s, standing next to Larranaga, his coach, on the fast break. And that was when I was like, he's not missing tonight. We got to find some way to score and just keep up with scoring because they're not going to stop that guy tonight. I do think that what Houston does in a larger sample would prevail. And I know it's easy to say, like, oh, I think if you play them like in a classic, I mean, in the NBA, they play best out of 7 series. I think Houston wins more often than not in this matchup. I think if Jamal Shed had played as well in the first half as in the second half, because he actually finally scored and went to the basket, ran the HB dive type plays, right, that I'm talking about. He ran those kinds of things in the second half. He didn't look like himself in the first half. He had like hot packs on his back, right? I think Houston wins this basketball game because they have a more commanding first half and kind of dictate the second half on their own terms, right? Honestly, look, I love Juwan Roberts. This is not a slight to him, but in any way, he did not play well. Right, he played just 22 minutes because coach felt it too. So put Reggie Chaney in for a long stretch in both halves. Roberts had just 2 points, just 2 rebounds, just 1 assist. And on the season, on an average standpoint, he's averaging 10 and 8, right? 10 points and 8 rebounds. Even just looking at an average Juwan Roberts game makes a dominant difference here. Now, part of it, I think, is he is worn out chasing Norchad O'Meara around. And part of it it wasn't his night. And those things all convalescing on the same night really, really hurts, especially when it's March Madness, obviously. But that's the deal with 1-game samples. That's the reason this thing goes that way. In the third segment, I'd like to talk some about a big fella, big kid that we have not talked much about tonight, that we have had a really, really good time talking about all season long. That's Jarace Walker. And man, what a fun kid to watch his pro career blossom soon. But first, let's talk about Built Bar. Now, Built Bar has this March Madness bracket, and the Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now it's time to make it count. Go to builtsmartmadness.com and vote for your favorites. Again, I'm voting for Coconut Almond, and if you want whomever to win, make sure you be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff, and when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered straight to your door. You got to try Built. Built's the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing. You won't think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and puffs so good is, for starters, that they're covered in real chocolate while being high protein and low in sugar. That's right, real chocolate, high protein, low sugar. I have to say that this is one of my favorite things to always read, because this is actually, as a teacher, typically might grab one or two of these for my breakfast of choice. Run to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff, and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. March is almost over. All right, so I mentioned at the top, but in post-game commentary, Jarace Walker did say to a handful of reporters at locker in a very calm, matter-of-fact kind of way, that he's going to the NBA this year. And like he mentioned that different ways that this is the most he's ever cried after a loss in his life, that these guys really are his brothers in different ways. I'm paraphrasing here, right? But and in very nonchalant kind of ways, like, this hurts because this was it. This was the time he's spending at Houston. He's going to the NBA. He's put his time in working, and he's going to go. And I think what's interesting is that there continue to be people like, what, like, on Twitter and things like that, and I can't tell if they're just trying to get clicks and retweets or reactions, or that's probably the case because that seems to be what Twitter does these days. But of course, Jarace is going pro. He's projected to be drafted. Some have him as high as 3rd. People have him at like 5 and 6 consistently. No one's got him later than 12th of any major draft board I've seen. And I looked, right? No one's got him later than 12th. For reference, if he were the 5th pick in the NBA draft, he gets a guaranteed $6 million salary in the first year of that contract, right? $6 million. The highest NIL deals you're seeing all around college basketball are kids getting a total of like $800K, right? Like, this is not in the same ballpark kind of money. And if you got as high as 3rd, it's more like, 9.5 or $10 million or whatever. Like, this is not close. And of course, it's he's earned it. He has earned the right to be that kind of a draft pick. He's 6'9", he's 240, he's skilled with the ball. And what I've enjoyed most, and we'll talk more about it as we follow Jarace throughout the draft process too, 5-star kids that are as talented as Jarace don't typically pick the Houstons of the world. And I don't mean based on school size. What I mean is, when you sign up to play at Houston, you're signing up to play in Coach Kelvin Sampson's system, where if you foul a guy on a three-pointer like Jarace Walker has, you sit like Jarace Walker did. When you sign up to play for Houston, you're signed to play for Kelvin Sampson, which means that it's going to be a lot of point guard dominated play. So if you're a 5-star power forward and you do a great job at IMG Academy, the top basketball school in the country your senior year, playing the point forward type role with other 5-stars around you, but you're leading the break and creating the offense, you're not going to get to do that at Houston. Jarace Walker didn't care. Jarace Walker wanted to play for a team that preached and valued competition. And he did. And he learned it. And he got better at it. And it was visible. It was tangible. It was palpable by the end of the season to see him grow into the mud in his blood competitor that Houston tries to create in all of their basketball players under Kelvin Sampson, right? He knew that was the thing that was best for him. He's got the finesse skills for a guy his size. He's got the jump shot. He's a phenomenal passer. There were 3 passes thrown in the Sweet 16 game against Miami, the behind the back to Sasser for 3, the high low to Jawan for his only basket of the night. Like, those moments don't just happen. And they don't just happen when the guy doing them is 6'9", 240. That's just not a thing that is that common. So I hope in the 5 or 6 months we got to watch Jarace Walker play in a Houston Cougar basketball uniform, you enjoyed it as much as I did, because those kinds of guys are typically looking for, well, who's going to showcase me? Who's going to show me off? Who's going to make me look appealing to NBA scouts? Not who's going to actually make me better. I'm already good, right? Who's going to make me the 5-star, I've been top everything since I was born in basketball, kid, ready to go and sign the big Nike deal? That's not Jairus. As I was very reminded, so I got asked on Twitter, do you remember when Jarace Walker signed his letter, committed to, not signed his letter, but committed to come to University of Houston? I was like, no, I just remember seeing it on social media. That's because that's the only way it was presented. There was no big press conference. He did an Instagram live session with the guy doing recruiting work. I was like, where are you going? Unzip just hood, put on his hat, going to Houston. And like everyone, his teammates were in his dorm room at IMG, and everyone's excited. But there wasn't some big press conference. IMG literally does the press conference thing for his other teammates. Keontae George had one, right? Those guys get that thing. He didn't want that. He wanted it down to earth, cool, calm, collected, laid back. Going to Houston, boom, boom. Why? Coach Sampson values winning, right? Like, it was very, very short, sweet, to the point. He's a special, special kid. And as this program grows, it will become more and more common, unless the landscape dramatically shifts, for Houston to continue to have guys that are one and done. It's generational wealth promised you in the lottery, right? $6 million in your first year as an NBA player at the 5th overall pick is a generational changing kind of money. You can't turn it down. I don't care what situation you come from. You can't turn it down, especially when that money's coming for living out your lifelong dream of being an NBA basketball player, right? It's going to be more and more common to see those guys come through Houston. I'm telling you, I don't know if there's any in the 2023 class. Mercy Miller may be in a later class. I digress. Those guys will continue to come through Houston. Jarace will not be the last, but he will be unique in how he did it. He will forever be the first to do it how he did it, because these guys don't just do this how he did it. They don't do it without all the pomp and circumstance. They don't buy into the culture about we, not me. They don't buy into all those things like Jairus did, and that's what makes him special. And that's why I want to see him in an NBA uniform being successful. We don't see a lot of those guys in pro basketball either, right? As a guy that loves basketball, we don't see those guys in that league either a whole lot. And I don't mean to go off on tangents or anything, but he's a special, special kid, and I'm excited to see what's next for him. We'll be following his draft process. We'll be following Marcus Sasser's draft process. There's whispers that other guys may test the waters and do the deal where you get evaluated. So we'll see where all those things go. I have my thoughts there, but we'll save those for later episodes. Locked on Cougs ain't going anywhere, right? We do follow football and basketball very, very closely. We got to get back to, now that March Madness is over for Houston, talking something about spring practices. I've got feelers out on guys that are not just telling me stats from pro days. We do need to cover Houston's pro day from last week someday this week. All that and more will be coming each and every day at Locked On Cougs. To make sure you follow me at Painsworth512, PAINSWORTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all your social media handles, as we start to move into what's happening when the football and basketball teams aren't on the field and court so much here each and every day. I'm happy to talk Houston Cougars, football, basketball. I'm following baseball in a tertiary kind of way, but I'm also following Astro spring training, the Rockets, who they're going to pick. I'm kind of excited about the Texans NFL draft. So we'll see where those kind of things go. I like the D'Amico Ryans hire. They made some great free agency pickups. Those, like, that could actually move really, really quickly. Talk all things Houston sports at Painsworth 512, PAINSWORTH 512 on all your social media handles. Also, if you're looking for a second listen of the day and you don't mind talking more about college basketball, trust me, Locked On College Basketball has you covered. If you can get fast forward through the painful parts about Miami and Houston, because Andy and Isaac are doing a great job covering the rest of the field as well. They were texting me. I think they're as shocked as we both are that Houston fell a little flat. And the shots did not fall, but they're covering the rest of the tournament very well. So make sure you go check them out. Thank you all so much for tuning in today in what was a difficult episode of Locked On Cougs. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, or on our team, I still think the best team in the country that got unlucky on Friday night. Every day, go Cougs.